So my name is Steve Kurtz, and in 1988 to 1991, I was the head of an accounting firm called Schenck and Kurtz Baker here in Denver. We did a lot of tax planning, financial planning, deal structuring. And the way I got involved in baseball was very, very, I think, interesting. I got a call from the governor in 1988. And he said to me, okay, they're thinking about expanding, the National League's thinking about expanding Major League Baseball. And so we need to figure out what it would look like to have to an ownership group. What would be the actual financial ramifications to an ownership group? And I started running some numbers and getting some input. I got some introduction to some other major league teams that actually were very helpful to us in trying to provide us with some data. And then that just got shelved. The National League said, nope, we're not going to actually go there. So, then, fast forward to the 1990 frame time, the governor called again and said, dust off the numbers and update them. And we're going to have a meeting. If the stadium vote passes, we're going to have a meeting to try to find ownership. And at that meeting, I'd like to be able to explain to somebody, what the numbers look like. Is this economic? Is this going to cost a lot of money or whatever? So it was kind of like everything else we did with the Colorado Rockies and baseball in Denver at that time. It was a hurry. I mean, everything had an immediate deadline. There was no time. So my time really was doing just that, and I kind of renewed some of my acquaintances that I had been introduced to at other major league teams who shared some numbers confidentially with us, and those that were real competitive, they didn't do that. But there was a lot of published numbers on baseball, so you could pretty much tell. My job was to move it into kind of the Denver market and say, what's it going to be like here? So when the stadium vote passed, and then we had that meeting downtown a couple of days afterwards, and it was interesting to me because I knew a lot of the players in the room, not personally, but I knew of them. I mean, and I didn't know, I didn't know some of the players at that point. I didn't really know Steve Earhart at that time. And interesting enough, I had met Paul Jacobs about a year, 18 months earlier, because I had asked Paul to do some legal work for our accounting firm. And so I had met Paul about that point in time, and it was fascinating because he was there, and he was kind of after the governor running the show. He was kind of watching it and going through. So now we had John McHale in the room, who was obviously very affiliated with the stadium part of this. And so when it came to be kind of my time to say, what do you want to do? I mean, what do you want to present? I actually asked John to leave the room because I wanted just ownership people in the room as if they were kind of my clients. I'm advising you. I'm not going to give any secrets away to anyone else. So my tact with baseball was interesting, and that was everybody believed it was a middle to small market. And I had no reason to make anybody think it was other than that, except that I know how sports crazy we were in Denver. So I always, in the back of my mind, thought, that's something that could really, we maybe could do better here than I thought. So I presented my projections, and at the time, baseball was asking a totally unreasonable $95 million for the franchise. Franchise that today Forbes says is worth well over $1 billion, but they were being very unreasonable. No one had ever come close to those numbers before. So I told the group a few things. I said, first of all, you need, if you're going to have $95 million, you need at least 100, maybe to 120. And you need that much money because you're going to have startup costs. You're going to have some operating capital. And you're going to have and Major League Baseball required at least 60% to be equity at the time. So it was pretty clear that we needed, we need to raise a lot of money. But I said, more important than any of that, is that we need to have a rent-free stadium. I said, the baseball ownership group needs to not pay rent. They need to have the stadium delivered to us. Now, I knew at the time there were proposals it was going to be a public-private partnership, and the numbers were anywhere from 50-50 to 70-30, and I remember all that, but I looked and I said, throw that out. I said, because we need all the concessions, all the parking, we need, all of the, pay no rent. We need to really make sure that what is delivered to the baseball team is a pristine baseball-only stadium so that we could actually have a chance in this small to middle market. What I really believed at the time was that would have been my negotiating posture. I never really thought that we'd actually get that, but we did. And it was a whole series of events that got there. That was probably the largest economic issue that actually, that baseball, that the Major League Baseball in Denver actually had at the time. I think that getting that stadium really pushed us over the edge. And then there was times that we started taking reservations for season tickets early on, so that by the time the National League did their site visit, which is well after we were in New York, and I'll backtrack to that in a minute, by the time that happened, we had over 21,000 reservations, and I think at the time that was maybe second in baseball. Maybe the Dodgers had more. I don't think any other team member. So that was impressive. And a sideline story to that, I don't know if Paul told you, but when we finally were awarded the franchises, and we were starting to call some of the people and say, all right, you made this reservation, and now you got to turn it into a real season ticket. And I think we ended up with, at that time, well over 21,000, maybe 26,000 in season tickets. But the one that stands out, and I didn't make the call, but there was a guy in Nebraska who had reserved 18 season tickets. And someone on our group called him when it was time to convert that into real money, $16 a game. What a bargain that would be today. And we called him. We said, no, let's be clear. You're buying 18 tickets to each of those tickets to 81 home games. At whatever the price was at the time, and we said we just wanted to make sure that's one heck of a financial commitment. That's really what you wanted. And his words were something like, son, after 8 hours in my, on that tractor, a few hours in my Cadillac sounds just peachy. So he didn't mind driving in for these games. So, great story. Backtrack. So we're in the meeting. My projections all showed that we could average 25,000 people per game. Actually, people in seats per game, average that throughout the year. I was ripped up by when that word got out, and nothing was secret. Everything got out one way or another. Some of it planned, some of it, I don't know where it came from. But when that word got out, newspapers would criticize me. People thought I really should be put away. 25,000 people to a baseball game. Of course, the Denver Bears, Zephyrs, never had that kind of attendance, before. And I think if you look back at the history now, it's probably averaged 35,000. But we had some things going for us. And we had the middle market from a TV slot, and that was really important, our time zone. There weren't any other teams at that point in time, and that turned out to be a huge plus with the new TV contracts that baseball enjoys today. We did have an interesting group of people sitting around the table, and as the meetings went on trying to find an ownership group, and I had made the presentation, and various people would come up and ask me questions. But it seemed to me that the Paul Jacobs and Steve Earhart were the only people around the table that had a fighting chance. It just seemed that way to me. So every time we took a break, I would go move papers so I could move a few seats closer to them, because I figured that was where the action was going to happen if it ever was going to happen here. So I'm sure you heard the stories. We had a couple meetings. The governor, with his task force, then kind of anointed the Earhart group to go forward with no authority to do so. And we picked it up and kind of ran from there. It was interesting because I think the application had to be in within, less than 2 weeks to Major League Baseball to apply for the team. There were like 14 cities at the time. And then then we had to start preparing for some visit in New York with the expansion committee, and so we had a lot of work to do during that time. And basically all these people working were kind of just all doing it on the hope and prayer that we'd have a shot to get Major League Baseball. But it was clear that the Monforts and Jerry McMorris, a number of other people were stepping up to the plate because they thought it would be good for Denver. I don't think any of them really believed it would be, any of them but me believed it would be a good economic deal. Now, I believe the franchise, if we ever were lucky enough to be awarded it, would increase in value, and someone would eventually at some point make money. But I don't think anybody saw the kind of economics coming down the road here that actually later played out. So I was constantly updating these projections and constantly communicating with partners. A lot of my job was to go with Paul or Steve Earhart, and then when Mickey Monas and John Antonucci got involved, we'd go begging for money. And that's what it was. And we were all over, the place just trying to figure out how to make that work. And we always told people that, oh yeah, we're gonna get this money. We really were shooting more like for 90 million of equity and hope we could put another like 20 or 25 million in debt on top of that. At the end of the day, we never got there, though we always told everybody we'd have the equity. In fact, I can remember sitting in several meetings with National League officials telling them, oh, we got the money, we've got the equity. We didn't really have it. But we thought we had a chance. So we played it out. And it was interesting because we talked about Paul Jacobs and the relationship that he forged with Bill White, who was the president of the National League at the time. That became critical down the road because Bill's friendship with Paul, I just think when there was question, Paul had real credibility with the league and then therefore with the commissioner because of that. So it made a big difference. When we would go out, we would always take like swag with us. So we'd give people hats and we'd give people baseballs, and we tried to do whatever we could to try to get them, excited about it. So we filed the application. We got invited back to New York for the committee, the expansion committee's presentation, and I gave the presentation then for the about what baseball looked like economically in Denver. And part of what we needed to do at that point, from my perspective, is we really needed to get a major bank behind us. Now, I didn't have all the equity, and so banks loan on, all right, collateral and equity. So what was their collateral? It was the Major League franchise, when and if we got it. And they wanted to have a lot of equity, though, in there in front of them. So there was a time when, Antonucci and Jacobs and I went to New York, and we had a whole series of bank meetings set up just to try to establish a banking relationship. And it was an interesting day, and I know people remember this story differently, but for me it was very depressing because people would laugh you out of their office. I mean, these big banks we went to, and they go, we're not interested in Major League Baseball, and particularly Major League Baseball in Denver. We have no idea what that's about. And you guys don't have enough population out there to draw anybody or sell, to advertisers and sponsors. And I mean, literally laughed out. So what was interesting in that process to me was that our last meeting of the day, and I think it was a Thursday afternoon, was at J.P. Morgan. And we had been to several banks, and I was quite honestly not thinking, all right, how am I going to regroup from this? Because this has been a fairly bad day for baseball, and most of them were good. Most of them, not all. Most of them were good. So went into J.P. Morgan, and that's where we met Scott Nickham. I always say there's been a lot of fathers of, who rightfully can say they were part of the reason we got Major League Baseball, and some more than others. And Scott Nickham was clearly, at that point in time, he was one of the top people in the private bank at J.P. Morgan. And I remember it's 4 o'clock roughly in the afternoon. We have like a 7 o'clock plane back to Denver that night. And I'm thinking, okay, I've been kicked out of all these other banks laughingly. What am I doing here? I mean, J.P. Morgan's going to throw me out the window. I mean, it's going to be, and so honestly, as I started telling my parts of the story, I started kind of just not very energetically going through them. I kind of sloughed them off a little bit. I figured these guys are never going to bite. And there were 4 people from J.P. Morgan in the room. I can picture the room when I close my eyes right now. And all of a sudden, after we kind of gotten through the story a little bit, Scott Nickham looked at us and he said, we're really interested. Could you stay the weekend? And I had to literally say, I'm sorry, what did you say? Would you repeat that, please? We stayed the weekend, of course. We worked with them, particularly on the financial side of it. So I was especially busy that weekend. And the next Tuesday or Wednesday, I forget which day it was, we walked into Major League Baseball and handed them an irrevocable letter of credit for $40 million from J.P. Morgan. So, then I start thinking, okay, we're going to put together a really good stadium deal. I didn't know if it would really be that we would have all of the revenue sources, but I knew we'd do that. I knew that we would, have this great banking relationship and this line of credit with J.P. Morgan, which was unheard of. And then, I think what else was happening, there were a lot of other things falling in place for us. We had people who really were willing to invest, though we were nowhere close really to the amount of money we needed. But we had people who were really willing to invest, and we had a lot of people that were willing to provide sponsorships, really to give us sponsorship. So, and this program of taking reservations for season tickets continued to grow. And it got to a place pretty quickly there where, to me, it was clear that this was going to be a pretty good economic deal. And I could see at that point in time, this team's going to make some real money. And I don't mean just from the cost today to what it's like 20 years from now or 30 years from now when someone wants to sell it. I mean, each and every year. We talked about all aspects of it. My advice was we've got to keep player salaries low. The first few years we'll be on a honeymoon in Denver. Everybody's going to want to come out and see what Major League Baseball looks like. Winning the game wasn't the most important thing. Just having a team that could, be somewhat competitive. And of course, that's kind of the way it happened. And so that's kind of the buildup for me. And of course, I was constantly involved with still trying to work with investors. I just remember, though, that when Paul and John Antonucci and they were able to kind of secure the Kurtz financing, that kind of put us over the top. Because it was not just $15 million in equity, it was $15 million in naming rights. And that was big. We counted all that as equity, so we cheated. But, and we told everybody we were kind of cheating. But it was good because that kind of made it real at that point in time. We really had the number. That's not to say, I mean, others like the Monforts and Jared McMorris, they all stepped up to the plate and increased the amount of money. Orrin Benton was a saint. I mean, he was a savior to all of us. And as far as really, I think the number for him was like 10 million. But there are other people that put in real hard money. I mean, at that point in time, even today, $75 million is a lot of money. Not compared to the $1 billion value of the franchise, but it was a lot of money. But we continued to move down the road, and I'm sure you've heard the stories about kind of the waiting games we played. how we made the short list of cities, how we then had the presentation in Denver, which was outstanding. Paul can tell you that better than anyone I know. And then, kind of the waiting game after that it was a lot longer wait than we thought till they finally gave us the franchise. Now, we didn't really have the franchise. They just said, we've awarded it. Now that means we had to sign this franchise agreement, we had to pay for the franchise, we had a lot of things we had to do at that point in time. And, but we were off and running. I mean, we were converting season tickets, we were starting to get everybody aligned with regard to hiring even the baseball side of operations. A lot was going on. My next real memory, I mean, there was lots of them along the way, but the next important memory was when Mickey Monas came to town. Now, we had read in the weeks leading up to that in July that Mickey had been promoted to like vice chairman or something of Farmore. So, Farmore was his retail, kind of like drugs chain. That kind of promotion was questioned. Why did they do that? I mean, why did they take him out of being CEO? What was going on? We had no clue. But that day, Paul called me and says, "Get down here now." And we came down. I came downtown to the offices, and Mickey was there. And Paul and I walked in, and Mickey said, "I'm no longer acceptable to baseball." I mean, again, it's one of those things I can just close my eyes and picture that meeting in the room we were in. And I'm thinking, oh boy, what's this mean? Because we didn't really have the franchise. And baseball would have been happy to give it. There were a lot of other cities that wanted this franchise. So, we started talking, and right away Paul said, "Mickey, don't say another word. We don't want to know, because we don't want to ever testify that you told us anything. So what we want you to do," Paul brought down one of his partners, lawyers, to talk privately, attorney-client privilege to Mickey. But what came out of it was Mickey was no longer acceptable to baseball. And Paul and I, sitting in the room with him, could see how concerned, upset he was. So our thoughts were, we'll never see this guy again. We're never going to see Mickey again. So we said to Mickey at that time, "Mickey, we want to buy your interests in the baseball team right now. We want to buy it right here and now." And we did. And we wrote up the documents, and we all signed the documents. I issued my personal check, because that's the consideration for it, to Mickey for $10,000. Still have a copy of that check. And we walked out of that meeting. Mickey went back on a plane to I think, New York or Youngstown, and we literally owned the majority interest in the team at that point in time. And this is after we've already been told publicly we've been awarded the franchise. So, pretty scary times for us. So we thought, we have a lot of people we better start talking to. So Paul and I, particularly Paul, got on the phone with the partners, like the Monforts and McMorris and Orrin Benton, and said, "Here's what we got. Here's what we did." And then we booked airline reservations right away to New York, because we knew we had to go sit down with Bill White and the commissioner and say, "We got things under control. We got it all. He's no longer involved. We have his interest. He's not going to be a factor. There's lots of ways we can go from here." And we had to go sit down with J.P. Morgan. And we had to walk into Scott's office and say, "Here's kind of what's going on." Now, by the time we had done that, Mickey he actually had done a favor for us. He actually went, I think, and turned himself in to the feds, so it was public. This is what's happened to Mickey. So everybody kind of understood that at that point in time. But where we were going to go, that any one of those people, J.P. Morgan could have said, "Thanks, but we're out." They hadn't funded a dime yet. Baseball could have said, "It's too big a mess for us. We're out." So it was a lot of massaging going on to try to make sure that everybody would stay on our side, and we did. But by that time, interesting enough through the numbers, baseball as a business in Denver had become very lucrative and very attractive. And all the partners that were investors knew that. So after those meetings, we came back to Denver, and that's pretty much when McMorris took control. Jerry knew better than anyone, how lucrative baseball was becoming for this team. And he also, I think he and Orrin and the Monforts knew that if they didn't step up even more, that baseball or J.P. Morgan or somebody was going to pull this from us. So there were a few weeks of pretty intense times going on. The team, the group of people that were trying to work through the transaction now were kind of huddled up downtown in a law office. And I would go there from time to time when I was summoned, basically, by Mr. McMorris to kind of come in and talk to him. But, it was interesting to me because one of the things that's little known is that I had signed a deal with John Antonucci and with Mickey Monas a couple months before that to actually become president of the Colorado Rockies. And so I have this contract. I own, with Paul, the majority of the stock in the company, and it was a very, very difficult negotiation. And it was difficult from the standpoint that I believed and Paul believed that the stock we had bought from Mickey was on behalf of the other partners. I mean, that was our duty. There was no question about that. But we were treated pretty harshly by the ownership group at that point in time, where I can tell you there's several instances during those meetings of them trying to put together, and I just said, I've had enough. I'm getting up, and I'd get up and walk out of the office. I mean, over those couple of weeks, and generally one of Mr. McMorris's lawyers would follow me and say, if you don't do this, let me tell you the lawsuits you're going to get. Let me tell you what's going to happen to you. I mean, and I'm just kind of, this isn't my first rodeo. I mean, I've been through this before, so I'm trying to deal, just fairness and arm's length with everybody. Let's move this down the road. So, eventually what happened is that obviously, McMorris and Monfort in particular bought out that share. And they did it full knowing that it was a very, very lucrative deal. And I don't blame them. I would have done it if I could too, but my interest was really aligned with all of the partners, not for myself at that point. But I did have, I did say to them, look, I have this contract to become president. And what are you going to do about that? And because McMorris made it very clear, Kurtz, you're out of baseball, out of this team. Jacobs, you're out of this team. I mean, a lot of things. So I just said, okay, tell me how you want to handle this. And that's when it turned out that I actually was be able to become a partner in the Rockies. And so I own this small little percentage of the Rockies for a number of years, which I later sold to back to the team because there was no reason to continue to hold it forever. And the excitement of, well, let me put it this way, I wasn't even recognized as a partner, back in those days, so it didn't matter, that I owned it or didn't own it. But for me, I think at the end of the day, that's the transaction that happened. But it was pretty scary when Monas walked in and said, I'm no longer acceptable to baseball. For sure, that's it. Now, after that, my roles dwindled. The Rockies, I did everything during the early days, from the projections. I used to carry the checkbook around with me in my briefcase. I did all the tax returns. I handled all the tax work for the team. But eventually that was turned over to a full-time staff at the Rockies, which is where it should have been. It's a great story.
So tell me a little bit more about the dynamics of what happened that kind of pushed Earhart and Antonucci out also?
Well, so I have a lot of mixed views on that. I think that Jerry McMorris kind of did that because he could. And I think that even though we were encouraging John Antonucci, don't sell your stock, stay in the deal. I mean, I think he was worried what other shoes were going to drop because of his other business dealings with Mickey Monas. And so he saw, look, I can get this off. I mean, they had all borrowed a lot of money to make their partnership investment. If I can get this off the books, it's better to do that. And I think Jerry McMorris just saw the opportunity and wanted to take over. And I think that's what it was more than anything. As I said, this has become a very lucrative opportunity at that point in time. This was going to, for a number of years into the future, throw off some real cash flow, which it did.
So kind of being the finance guru guy in terms of working the numbers, what did you think when Jerry McMorris wanted to expand the seating from the original plan to expanding it to a 50,000
seats?
43 to 50.
Yeah. So, well, my thought of it was is he did it because he knew he could sell the tickets. I mean, nothing matters more in baseball 25 years ago or today than actually, bottoms and seats. You've got to fill those seats because that's going to drive parking, concessions, not only ticket sales, everything you want to do. So when he saw that opportunity to do that, I understood that. Now, as we know, the Coors Field probably should have stayed at 43,000. Just going to, I don't know anything other than going to the games and seeing where sections are totally blocked off most of the season. But it's pretty hard to be sitting at the old Mile High Stadium and have 80,000 people in a baseball game and not think, wow, we're going to fill up 50 grand every game. So I think that from an economic standpoint, Jerry was probably looking at it from an ownership perspective very, in the right way. I was gone from working with the Rockies by that time, so I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but I wasn't surprised when it happened by the time Coors Field opened. So.
Have you followed baseball a lot since then?
Yeah, I followed it a lot since then.
Do you go to games?
I go to a lot of games. Part of my deal was I got 8 great seats right behind home plate, and I pay for them every year now, like everybody else. But I enjoy going to them. I'd like the Rockies to really do well. What I don't think anybody envisioned was that whether they're a bad team or a good team, if they're a bad team, people love the environment at Coors Field, and they'll come out. It's a special place to be on a Sunday, on a summer night. I mean, it's perfect. The weather's perfect. It's not humid. There's no bugs. I mean, you sit and have your beer and you enjoy things with your friends. It's a perfect way to spend a summer evening. I don't think that was ever in our computations of how well this team would do. And we go to a lot of other stadiums. It's just doesn't work that way. You go to the brand new stadium in Atlanta, and now the newness will wear off a little bit on it, but for the Braves, but there's some not so nice nights that you have to sit out there. Miami finally had to do a stadium they could close because you'd hear it was going to rain for some period of time. So in Denver, we have a very unique opportunity, and so no one factored that in for myself. I love going to the games. I love watching them. I really like them to do well. I want the team to do well. I think that that Dick Monfort is doing everything he knows he can do to try to bring a team here. And you got to be faced with the reality that it's a mile high. And unless you can close that team and pressurize it to sea level, you're not going to be able to erase those differences of how far the ball is going to fly. But I think they know it better. It took a while, but they've learned this is what we need to do to make baseball a little more competitive in Denver.
Right. So if you had to do this whole experience over again, would you do it?
Yeah, I'd do it. I probably would have not been quite so easy in saying that you know, here's what I would have done different. I would have met with all the other partners a lot more than I was able to after the McMonus blow up, so that they were clear what they all had and what the opportunity was there. Yeah, I mean, it was the closest thing I'll ever get to being a real part of a major league professional team. I mean, so yeah, I'd do it again in a heartbeat, and I love baseball. But that world's really changed now. So big numbers was pretty big then. It's really big now. So.
Well, I think, as you probably are very well aware, that Neil and I were very critical of the lease that was put together and all of the revenues being given away. And I don't know, we may have softened our position a bit since that time, after understanding a couple of nuances and things. You know, one of those is that maybe Neil and I were not convinced that that lease had to be where it was and part of the package in order to secure the team. At that time, what were the cities that were your biggest worry that may have a better proposal or opportunity than Denver? Who were you most worried about?
Yeah. So, I think we were worried a little bit about Phoenix because it was close to our time zone. The Tampa St. Pete area really had a strong showing from what we know, though we really believed it would go to Miami if they were going to put one there. And Tampa St. Pete seemed to have a really big connection to Major League Baseball, as seen by the next expansion. They got the team. So that was concerning. Buffalo was in there. I mean, but the weather there is horrendous. So I was worried about those cities probably more than others. As you asked the question about the lease, I took the stand that I took with the owners when I first met a potential ownership group, because I really wanted everybody to have that in their mind, that, look, let's go for all of the revenue sources. I didn't ever think that would be the end day. But what happened was a couple things that caused that, I think. One was everything was on a fire drill. We had to have the application in 2 weeks. We had to have a $100,000 deposit, as I remember. We had to get ready for our presentation and get all these political and civic people involved for the presentation to the expansion committee. We had to get the lease done. We had to get the bank done. Everybody loved the thought of having Major League Baseball in Denver. They thought that would be great for our community and great for us. And so I think they didn't all act in business sense all the time. They sometimes acted emotionally in some of these times. So that, added with the pressure we were under to get everything done and tied up so we could really prove to baseball that we were a viable candidate, adding all that together, I think, made people do some things that when you look back you say, wow, I mean, why did we give that, or why did we do that? And yet I think it was at the end of the day, it was great for the city. I mean, as I recall, you sponsored the bill. And, like I say, baseball has lots of fathers and mothers that really made baseball happen here. If not for that, what would have happened? I mean, there's a lot going on. As I remember, Neil, most of the time that I heard your name, it was in association with DQ. And we didn't know where John was going to be back in those days, but John clearly would have been the person that most likely would be the owner. And then when he kind of didn't get there, that was pretty interesting. So lots of things happened in making this go that I don't think will ever be repeated again. And it just fell in place.
Well, one of the things I think Neil and I have come to appreciate is that, from what I understand, is that there was a stadium built the year before Coors Field, and there was a stadium built the year after Coors Field, and both of those are being torn down. And that some people credit, or partly credit, the lease and the Rockies doing good maintenance on the stadium for us not being in a situation where we would have to tear down and rebuild. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah,
or-
I think you're absolutely right. I think that nobody's going to get that deal again anywhere in professional sports. I mean, it happened, I think, after, but nobody's going to get that deal again. So, and Coors Field is a special place. Now, it's interesting, you know, a lot of people will say some of the stadiums that have been replaced recently, you know, they're old. I mean, Coors Field's coming up on 23 years old. Some people would say, you know, the times have changed. Baseball's economics didn't change like football's did, or even basketball's. I mean, Coors Field was built the right way with the right number of suites and opportunities to be able to take advantage of the economics that still continue to exist. I'm sure if Dick Monfort was in here, he'd say, I need this long list, and I wouldn't blame him a bit. But Coors Field was a little unique in that way. And the economic deal, I mean, if there was a new stadium, it wouldn't be that attractive.
Well, you know, talking about how the times have changed, you know, one of the other interesting things is, you know, we talk about things happening serendipitously. One of those serendipitous things certainly was, you know, expanding to 50,000 plus seats. And today, a lot of that has been torn down and now is a party deck.
Yeah.
And have you looked at any of the economics on what party decks do, or?
No. I mean, I remember people saying in the paper, "Hey, it's going to cost $10 million to put in that party deck, and how about we get ourselves a good relief pitcher instead?" You know, so you know, but so I don't know the economics of it, but I know it's almost always full. I look over there when I'm sitting in my seats. There must be a lot of people having a lot of fun up in there. And great way to see.
Not watching the game, yeah.
Yeah, and again, I don't know, when people go to the game, there's this group of diehard baseball fans who watch and they record every pitch. And then there's, on the other spectrum, these group of people that are just going there because it's a great place to be and could care less about baseball. And part of it is our world's changed. I mean, if you look at the age of people going to baseball today, in my opinion, versus when it was 25 years ago, it's a younger crowd, and you've got to do things like party decks and that to attract them to it. And I'm sure that's been it. I hope that those kind of changes are resulting in, and I believe they are, you know, the Rockies being able to have more revenue to spend on players to improve the quality of baseball. I'm a baseball guy at heart, and that's what I'd really like to see happen.
Hopefully that's what will happen. When I was talking to McHale, I mentioned the party deck, and he says, yeah, we've noticed that, and he says, I think there's going to be some other teams doing the same thing.
I think it's, yeah, Denver's unique too, though. I mean, you know, it's just a unique place in geography and whatever else you have. And it's unique from altitude, it's unique geographically. I don't know this. My guess is there's not a lot of teams that love to come in here and play and move to a mile high and get worn out a little easier and watch the ball go over the fence a lot more.
Well, we hear too a lot about the design and the open concourse and how true baseball fans can still follow the game even if they're at the concession stand or us ladies standing in line to go to the restroom or whatever.
It's a great facility, and people flock there. And the difference between the approximate 35,000 people they're averaging per game and anything higher than that is strictly their record. It was interesting when we were doing these numbers, this is 25 years ago, so I'm sure life's changed because I haven't updated this, but back in those days, if you took a team that played 500 ball, meaning they won as many games as they lost, for every game over 500 that they won more than they lost, meant 50,000 fans per year.
Wow.
So if you're 10 games over, you know, that's 500,000 more fans, and that multiplies into seat revenue and concessions and parking and everything else. So now I don't know how true that is today, but that's what it was back in those days. So when we were looking at 25,000 people coming to the game, and people were thinking I needed to be committed someplace. They just didn't realize the vibrance of the city, and and in that part of town, being willing. Look what it did for that part of the city. Amazing,
Right.
just amazing.
Definitely not.
Thank
the
you all
same.
for what you did.
Well, I think, and Neil and I want to thank you, because I think you had many of the same challenges that Neil and I had. When we started working on the bill, we certainly didn't know for sure that Major League Baseball would absolutely expand. We certainly didn't know what a stadium would cost. We didn't know what the franchise fee was going to be. I mean, we were just kind of shooting in the dark.
No question.
As were you.
Yeah, and then you just jumped in, and there were a lot of
You know,
unknowns when you got in.
here we're
Yeah.
in a recession. You don't know what the
Exactly.
future holds. That recession was longer and deeper than any we'd certainly seen.
That's exactly right.
And to try to do numbers in a market that, that is kind of small and depressed must have been a real challenge.
Well, and it was also challenged by the fact that a lot of these owners of baseball teams, come from big businesses and big wealth, and they could then write the check. Well, like Wayne Huizenga, he didn't go out and syndicate and find partners. He wrote the check. We didn't have that in Denver. And the couple entities or people that we approached weren't interested, because nobody believed it would make money.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people who turned it down back then that probably wishes they would have made a different
Whole bunch.
decision.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
That was
guys. It was
Great
great
job.
to see you
Great
both
job.
again.
Yeah, yeah.
What are you
great.
doing now? Real estate?